Today's Tanya for the 24th day of Kislev is at the beginning of Perek Beis of Tanya. It's on Daf Vav Amud Aleph. The number at the bottom of the page is 6. In Perek Aleph, the Alter Rebbe introduces us to the fact that every Jew has two souls. One soul coming from unholiness. This soul is in the blood. It gives life to the body and it produces the negative traits as well as some positive traits. And now in Perek Beis, the Alter Rebbe will introduce us to the second neshama, to the godly soul. The reason that the godly soul comes second in Tanya is, one of the reasons, is because that's the way it is in life, that the animal soul comes to the person before the godly soul. The godly soul doesn't settle in until bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah, whereas the animal soul is there right at the moment of birth. Perek Beis. The nefesh hashen is b'Yisrael, and the second soul that is in Jews, only in Jews, hi chelek elokah mimal mamash, is a literal part of God from above. Kamei shekasuv, as it says, vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim. When the Torah describes the neshama, it says that God breathed into man a living neshama. What does it mean He breathed it into him? We also say in the davening, V'ata nafachta bi, you breathed the soul into me. So the Zehar explains that man de nafach, when one breathes or exhales, is meteiche nafach, he exhales from within, which means that in speech one uses a breath that is an external breath, whereas when one exhales, you blow out hard, that comes from an inner breath. So this breathing into the person, the neshama, implies that it comes from a place inward, an inner part of the breath, which means meteichi yusei upnipnimi yusei, from the inwardness, from the pnimius sheteichius upnimius hachayiv sheba-adam, because this inner life, this inner energy that a person has, meitzi benefichase bekayach, he exhales when he blows out hard. Which is why you can speak for a long time without becoming exhausted, whereas if you're blowing up balloons, you become exhausted very quickly, because you're using not only more breath, but a deeper, more intrinsic breath, which carries with it energy, life energy of the person. In the same way, by way of analogy, the Jewish neshama, the godly soul, is olu b'machshava. Everything else is created through speech. God said, let there be, but the neshama comes from thought, from a deeper place within God. Kidchsiv, as it says, B'ni b'chei Yisrael, banamatem Hashem Elokeichem. Jews are described as God's firstborn, as children to God. What is the comparison of a Jew in his relationship to God to a child in relationship to a father? This means that just as the son is derived from the brain of the father, of the parent, the same is also true that every Jewish neshama comes from God's mind, from God's thought and wisdom. How do we attribute wisdom to God? Because it says in the Zohar that God has wisdom, but not conventional wisdom, not the wisdom we know of. What is different about His wisdom? His wisdom is one with Him. In the human being, a human being is a composite being, and his wisdom is also composed of parts. There is the subject that he knows, there is the intelligence with which he knows, and he is the knower. So there are actually three parts to his chachma, whereas with God, He and His knowledge are one. And as the Rambam writes, Shehu hamada v'hu hayedeya, that God is both the knower and the knowing. Let's look at the note, the Haggadah. V'heidule chachmei HaKabbalah, and the sages of Kabbalah, the Kabbalists, agree with the Rambam, K'meshikosa b'Pardes Meharamak, as is written in the Sefer Pardes from Moshe Cordovera, the Gam Lefi Kabbalah so Arizal, and also according to the Kabbalah of the Arizal, Yitziva Milsa, the matter is true and correct. In Kabbalah it usually speaks about how God is much higher and transcends wisdom or any of the attributes. And here is saying that even the Kabbalah agrees that God and His wisdom are one. Through the contractions that are called Tzimtzumim, that God contracts Himself and expresses Himself through the Chochmah, Bina, and Das of Atzilus, on that level, and after the contractions, after the Tzimtzumim, it is true that God and wisdom are one and the same. But on the levels higher than Atzilus, or preceding the Tzimtzum, God is infinitely higher than the whole concept of wisdom. As it says elsewhere, that God Himself is infinitely higher and infinitely removed from the category of Chachma. To the point where Chachma, the highest of all attributes, is to God equal with action, which is the lowest of all faculties and attributes. As it says, Kulam b'Chachma osisa, that God made the world, He made it all, He did it all with Chachma. In other words, Chachma and doing are the same to God, equally insignificant. But when there's a Tzimtzum, and God contracts Himself into the Chochmah of Atzilus, He and the Chochmah are one. Back to the text. This subject is beyond man's ability to comprehend and to grasp properly. It's out of our experience. As it says, if you seek God, will you find? And it also says, my thoughts are not your thoughts. Although there are tens of thousands of various levels of souls, higher and higher, endlessly, so how can we say that all souls come from the same place and they are all a piece of God when we see that they are so different from each other? For example, the differences in souls. For example, the greatness and the superiority of the souls of the patriarchs and of Moshe Rabbeinu over the souls of our generation, that is called Ikve Mashiach, the heels of Mashiach. Their souls are infinitely greater than ours. Why are we called Ikve Mashiach, the heels of Mashiach? Because the souls of this generation are like heels compared to the mind and the head, which are represented by the souls of the patriarchs and of earlier generations. So we see that great difference between souls, that one soul is a head and a mind, and the other soul is a heel. The same is true not only in history, but in every generation. In each generation, there are those souls that are the heads. They are called Roshei Alfei Yisrael, because their neshama in that generation functions like the mind and the head to the other souls, the souls of the ignorant, of the masses, whose souls are like heels. And again, this is true not only of the higher levels of neshama, but also the lower level of nefesh, ki kol nefesh klula min nefesh ruach neshama. So although there are these great differences between souls, mikol mokeim sheirish kol hanefesh ruach neshama kulam meireish kol hamadreges atzeif kol dargin, Yet all the souls, from the highest to the lowest, the souls that are clothed in the ignorant and in the lowest of the low, all of them derive from the divine mind, brain, which is the divine wisdom, using again the analogy of the son who comes from the brain of the father or the mother. What do we see in that example? We find that in the child, in the fetus, even the toenails, the toenails are created from the same material, from the same substance that the brain of the child is created. During the course of the 9 months of the pregnancy. So this original stuff, this material from which the fetus is made, parts of it descend level after level, to be transformed, and to form eventually into the toenails. Because we would think that since the child comes from the substance of the father's brain, you would think that the resulting creation, that which is born, should look like a brain, should have the properties of a brain. And yet what we see is that from that brain material substance, the child develops not only its brain but also its toenails from the same substance. The im kol zeh, and in spite of all this change, this descent and transformation from brain material into toenails, in spite of it, it remains bound and united with a wondrous connection with its original substance, its original essence, and that is the original drop or substance that comes from the brain of the father. Because in the development of the fetus, that source of life from the father's brain is very much active in even the development of the toenail. So this is the analogy to the souls, that even those souls that have come down through many levels and been transformed by those levels into souls of the lowest of the low, the heels, yet in essence they remain always wondrously connected to their original essence. And also now, the ben, when the child is already born, and he's an independent being, and he's walking down the street, now you would say that the bond with the father has been broken completely, because it's no longer a fetus in the stages of development. It is now an independent human being, yet the toenail remains connected in a very deep way to the original substance, to the brain of the father. How so? The life of the toenail, the nourishment for the toenail, comes from the brain in the head, the brain of the son. As the Gemara says in Nida Sham, in the Gemara Nida, in the same place quoted earlier, that Leven Shamimenu Gidin Va'atzomes Utziparnayim, that the father and the mother each contribute different substances to the creation of the child. So it says that the father contributes the white stuff, the Leven, and from this white stuff comes the Gidim, the veins or the arteries, and also the bones, and the nails. And as it says in the Eitz Chaim, in Shara Chashmal, concerning the garments that Adam wore in Gan Eden, that the toenails came from Meyach Tvuna, from Bina. So we see that the toenail is connected to the brain, to the head. So the toenail, even after the son is grown up, the toenail continues to derive its nourishment, its life, from the brain, the son, the child's brain, And the child's brain hasn't changed at all from the brain of the father. It's the same substance. The same is true literally of every Jewish soul in its source. L'mayla, in its source above, that it comes from the same place, and biridose mimadrega lemadrega, when it comes down level after level, al yedei ishtalshalus ha'ela mesabiya, through the chain of worlds, Atzilus, Briya, Yitzira, Asiya, Mechachmose, Yizbarech, it all derives from God's Chachma. And God and His Chachma are one. Kidechsiv, Kulam B'Chachma Asisa, as it says, God made them all with Chachma. So from all of that, Nishava Mimena Nefesh Ruach Neshama Shal Ami Ha'aretz U'Pchusei Ha'erech. Eventually, these neshamas coming down through these chains of levels, eventually are transformed into the souls of the Amei Ha'aretz and the simple or lowly person. The Im Kol Zeh, but in spite of this external change and transformation, they remain connected and united biyichud nifla va'otzum, with a wondrous and strong connection b'mohusan v'atzmusan harishen, with their original essence, shehi amshachas chachma ilah, which is their original essence, their original substance was the hamshacha of chachma ilah, an expression of divine wisdom. Because the life and the energy that comes to the soul of the Amei Ha'aretz, who min nefesh ruach neshama shel hatzadikim v'achachamim rashi b'nei Yisrael shebedeiram, the energy of the soul of the simple person comes from the soul of the Tzadik, of the Chacham, that are called the heads of the people in each generation. So there are two things here. First of all, in the moshel, in the example of the child, during the birth, there is an amazing oneness that exists between the toenail of the child and the brain of the father, because it is all developing and evolving from the brain of the father. Even after it's evolved, and the child is now grown up and independent, there is still a very strong connection between the nail and the brain of the father through the intermediary of the brain of the child. Since the brain of the child has not undergone any transformations, it is the same substance as the father's brain. It is brain material, and it gives life to the toenail. So the toenail, through the brain of the child, is still connected to the brain of the father. In the same way with souls, during the process of the souls coming down into this world, the process itself is still an act of godliness, and therefore, like in the child, there's still a wondrous connection between the neshama. Even as it undergoes its transformations, it remains connected to God, to its original essence. And even after it's already embodied in the lowest of the low, in the Pchusei Ha'erech, it remains connected, not only in that it came from God, but it is actively connected even now through the neshama of the Tzadik, of that generation. Because every neshama of each generation receives its energy, its inspiration, its life from the neshama of the tzaddik of that generation, or the tzaddikim of the generation. And the tzaddikim of the generation, their neshama has not undergone any transformation at all. It remains purely godly in its original condition. So through the neshama of the tzaddikim, the neshama of the average person remains actively connected to God. And with this we'll understand. The statement of the sages on the verse, on the commandment that you should cleave to Him, to God. And the Gemara asks, how can you cleave to God? And answers, Shekol Hadavik B'Talmidei Chachamim, Maila Olav HaKosav Ki Lemidbak B'Shchina Mamish. That anyone who cleaves to the scholar, to the tzaddik, it's as if he is cleaving to the Shechina. How do we understand this? How is it equal? How is it that cleaving to a tzaddik is equal to cleaving to God? Because by cleaving to the Talmid Chacham, to the neshama of the Tzadik, Kshureis Nefesh Ruach HaNeshama Shel Amei Ha'aretz, in that, through that, the soul of the Amei Ha'aretz are miyuchodes b'muhusan ha'yishan v'sharsham shebechachma ilah. Their soul, the soul of the Am Ha'aretz, is united with its own original essence, which is the divine Chachma, Shehu Yizbarech v'Chachmasei Echad v'Hu Hamada. Because, and he and his wisdom, God and his wisdom, are one, as we said earlier, v'Hu Hamada. So through cleaving to a tzaddik, the neshama of the Am Ha'aretz becomes connected to the original substance or essence of his own neshama. He reconnects to his own source, which is divine wisdom. What about those neshamas, those people who refuse to cleave to a tzaddik? And those who rebel and reject the Talmidei Chachamim or the Tzaddikim, where does their neshama get its energy from? There can still be some goodness in them. Where are they getting their goodness from? Yinikas nefesh ruach haneshama shalohem. The nourishment for their neshama comes mebechinas acharayim shal nefesh ruach hanishmas Talmidei Chachamim. It comes from the hind part, from the back of the soul of the tzaddik, of the Talmid Chacham. In other words, indirectly, through rejection, they continue to receive energy from the tzaddik. So their connection to the tzaddik comes in a backhanded fashion, in that in their rejection they are connected to the tzaddik. So in spite of themselves, they are getting energy from the neshama of the tzaddik, and that's where their goodness comes from. Having said that every neshama, regardless of who it is born into, the neshama is godly and connected to its original source, yet it says in the Zayar, and in Zayar Chadosh, Sheho'ikev Tolui, that the condition of the child is dependent primarily, Sheyikadish Atzme B'shash Tashmish Dafke, that it all depends on the holiness of the parents at the time of conception. So that if the parents are holy at the time of conception, the child will be holy, and if not, the child won't be holy. And that's why the coarse people who don't sanctify themselves at the time of conception, their children don't have this benefit. So it seems to contradict what we're saying before, that all souls are equal, and here it's saying that it all depends on the holiness of the parents, on the behavior of the parents. So the Rebbe explains, Hainu, what the Zohar is saying is that Shum she'ein loch nefesh ruach u'neshama, she'ein lo levush, because every soul, and each part of the soul, nefesh ruach u'neshama, has a garment through which it expresses itself. And the garment comes, min nefesh, the atzmus aviv v'imei. It comes from the soul of the parents, of the father and mother. And all the mitzvahs that the child will do, it all comes through that garment. So the neshama, in doing a mitzvah, will express itself through this garment. Later on we'll find out that there are actually three garments, thought, speech, and deed. But it's not relevant here, the distinctions of garments, rather the fact that there is a garment. So primarily, the Alter Rebbe is referring here to the garment of thought. And even the inspiration that is given from above, from heaven, even that has to come through this garment. Therefore, if the parents sanctify themselves and are holy at the time of conception, they will bring to their son, to their child, a holy garment for the child's neshama. And even if it is a great neshama, it still needs the holiness of the father and mother in order to provide this great neshama with a holy garment, with a sensitive garment. But the neshama itself is not determined by the parent's behavior at all. And that's why in The soul of a person who is infinitely high, can be born to and be the son of a despised and lowly man. Lowly. As all of this is explained in the writings of the Ari, in Likutei Torah and Vayera, and in Tanya Mitzvahs in Parsha Bereshis. The Hayom Yom for Chavdalit Kislev is a continuation of the day before. The explanation of the 3 verses, beginning with L'chu Niranana, on a level that is meaningful and applicable to everyone, is as follows. Wednesday we begin thinking, what are we going to have for Shabbos? This is a concern in the literal sense. What are we going to eat? And also spiritually, how can we become Shabbosdik? After all, every person is quite different on Shabbos than on the weekday. So we might become a bit despondent. And the solution is, L'chu Niranana. Come, let us sing. Through faith and trust. Comes Thursday, it is now closer to Shabbos, and we still don't have the material, the goods, with which to become Shabbosdik, the inspiration. And it just doesn't seem to Niranana so easily. And we realize that we have to do something, that faith alone is not enough. So we study Chassidus on Thursday night, so that by Friday we begin to sense the meaning of that the Lord is a great God and a great King, which is the Yom for Friday. And with this insight, with this sense, a Jew can make Shabbos.